All right, everyone. Welcome for another Friday episode of the Manufacturing Ecommerce Success. I'm one of your co-hosts, Damon Pistolka. With me today, I've got my brother from another mother, Curt Anderson, the other side of the country. Take it away, Curt.
Hey, Damon. Thank you, brother. Man, this is what a year that we're starting off with, man. I'm still like I'm still like on a high from last Friday with Kerry
Yep.
Smith from Big S Fans. Guys, today we have the editor-in-chief from Inc. magazine. And here we go. I'm going for it, Scott. I'm just ripping off the band-aid.
Let's do it.
Scott Omelianuk, Scotty O, the editor-in-chief of Inc. magazine. Scott, Happy New Year. Welcome, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Happy New Year. And I say that with a bit of a question mark, right?
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Hey, we're all, we're on the right side.
We're in the same boat.
Yeah,
everyone's in the same boat.
We're above 6 feet, so we're doing phenomenal.
Yeah.
So
Good point.
So Scott, so this is such an incredible honor, privilege. I've been a raving Inc. fan for probably 30 years. And so to actually have the editor-in-chief, man, I'm not even going to pretend I'm not thrilled, excited, and starstruck right now. So what is, we have a ton to uncover, ton to unpack. And so my first question for you today, if somebody goes on your LinkedIn profile, and I encourage, welcome, invite everybody on the program, connect with Scotty O here. He's just a thrilling dude. How does somebody go from garbage man to the style editor of GQ magazine, all the way up to the editor-in-chief of Inc.? What's that path like? How did that happen?
This is an interesting story. And when I look at my career, I think, Jesus, this is just an example of someone who had no direction and didn't know what they wanted to do in life, right? But the fact is that it's true. I was a garbage man in the garment district for a while. I was a carpenter for a while too, getting out of school. And by the way, I was editor-in-chief of a brand called This Old House Ventures, which is the parent company of This Old House, the television.
Yeah.
Right. So there was a connection there. Yeah. I am myself a failed entrepreneur in the last handful of years. And so, somehow there is some cohesion there where I've always had jobs that have put me on the inside of the media job that I have, basically. And I think, ultimately that's what it was. It's sort of my version of starting out in the mailroom, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, so this is phenomenal. So, and I know entrepreneurship, and I thank you for your vulnerability, sharing that, we've all, dude, if I shared with all my failures, we'd be here all day. Yeah. You're a incredible entrepreneur. You've been supporting, helping entrepreneurs basically your entire career. I know entrepreneurship runs in your blood, in your family, so on and so forth. Share a little bit about, what's entrepreneurship meant to you and what drove you to Inc.
I think, so to back up, like a lot of people come to media as sort of a calling or as something they feel they needed to do. For me, it really came out of school, where I was a studio art major way back when I was in college. And I had a very nice art history professor who told me, Scott, I think you're a better writer than you are a painter, and maybe you should think about that. And I did, right? I thought about it, and it turned out it's true. I was a decent writer, but I didn't, and so that's how I ended up in media, right? After working those jobs for a few years. But I didn't have the same calling toward media, and I was a little bit, outwardly directed, I suppose you might say it nicely, which meant I was looking for the appreciation of others. So Shrink would say it the first way, I would say it the next way. And so I was always, even though I was in media, I was always looking for the next thing. And what are people doing? And so very early on in my career, there was this thing that started. First it was AOL and Prodigy and CompuServe and those things, right? But then it turned into the web, and I saw there's an opportunity for us, and then as that progressed, it was like video. Well, that's an opportunity for us. Yeah. And so I always kept seeing I worked at really strong brands, right? I worked at GQ magazine. I worked at Esquire magazine. I consulted to Playboy at one time and to some other magazines that don't even exist any longer. I worked for Ralph Lauren for a while, right? So these incredibly strong brands. So I always thought, like, where can these brands, because they're so well developed, where else can they go? And I think that's where my personal entrepreneurship came. Now, that was informed by a family like me, and we can talk about my failed entrepreneurial story later, but like me, we're entrepreneurial, not always successful, but always asking the question, what if, and why not me? And I think so, with those two things in mind, even if you are in a large company, and I have worked for, what at the time was the world's largest media company, you could be entrepreneurial by asking those questions. And so that's sort of how I approach it, right? Because the what if and why not me are the questions, whether the people on this call realize it or not, are what they asked to get them into the businesses they're in now, in one way or another.
Yeah, man, this is so good. So guys, again, happy Friday. If you're just joining us, please let us drop your comments on LinkedIn, share us where you're coming from. So guys, we're with Scotty O, from editor-in-chief of Inc. Magazine. And again, huge raving fan of Inc. Magazine, and probably a 30-year subscriber. I'd love to I'd actually like to look back.
I
have an issue right here. There's Gary V from the November issue. This is the only magazine, I'm Mr. E-commerce, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go digital. This is the only magazine I still religiously subscribe to. I have to have it physically in my hands. And guys, when you get Inc., here's our dear friend Scott right on the inside, Scott. And you have awesome articles. Strongly encourage, welcome, invite everybody. Grab Inc., go right online, Google Scott, and connect with Scott on LinkedIn. And Scott, you have awesome editorials. You kick off, each month with, again, heartfelt messages, vulnerable messages. Here you're talking lessons on leadership. And here's a great LinkedIn success story. As soon as your first month, I read your editorial. I was just captivated. And I'm like, I'm going to shoot this guy a note on LinkedIn. He's probably going to ignore it. And you came right back graciously and welcomed me into your network. And we've had a nice dialogue. Dude, what was it like your first month, if I'm not mistaken, of editor-in-chief was Damon? That's March of 2020 was right.
Oh, God.
Am I right, Scott?
I basically brought the pandemic to the office.
You brought the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it was not fun. And the first, honestly, the last 6 months have been terrific. The first year and a half was really difficult because I came to Inc. with, a mission, right? I had a brief that our owner and my boss thought I should pursue, and that I thought I could pursue, and that I had done before in other places, right? So reorienting a brand a little bit. So, yes, it's a magazine. Yes, it's a website. Where else can we go? So how do we energize the staff to think about, again, taking that brand to new places? How can we, with a mission of serving the American entrepreneur, where else can we do that? And yet at the same time, how do we make everything we currently doing better? And so suddenly I was with a group of people that I really didn't meet in person, and I'm telling them how they need to do everything differently. And it doesn't work well in the best of times, right? You need to develop trust. It's harder to develop trust, through a Zoom call. It's easy to have all that back channel conversation when you're not in the, I say something that upsets somebody, in the office, they see me 10 minutes later and realize I actually don't have horns and I'm not the ogre that I might have.
Yeah.
But when they don't see me and then they go and they talk to their colleagues about it, right back channeling, it's like it becomes a nightmare, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It's really hard. But I do have a bit of a peasant mentality, and I don't give up, as most entrepreneurs don't give up, and stuck with it, and slowly but surely think, we assembled a team that was most of the people who were here, a few new people, and we're moving in a great place now. But it took a long time, much longer than it would have otherwise, much more difficult than it would have otherwise. Yeah. I realized during that time how much I don't like working from home, because when you have those difficult conversations, and all work has some difficult conversations, no matter what kind of community or team members you have, no matter what your culture is, they're still difficult conversations. I want to leave those at the office. I have enough difficult conversations with my spouse. I don't, I don't need to add to them. Right. So I wanted to, so all that was incredibly difficult, but now I think we're in a terrific place. The last few months of 2021, I got out on the road and we had events for Inc. 5000 members. The Inc. 5000 represents the fastest growing 5,000 private companies in the country, right? And some of those in the past have been Microsoft, Dell, Zipcar, Under Armour, Chobani. So really, well-known companies that have started out in the Inc. 5000. But I got out and I got to talk to those people, and it was transformational, to be perfectly honest. Like being able to connect with people again, being able to talk about what we saw as mutual value, how we could serve them better. Which, by the way, as the editor of Inc. Media and as a professor as well, I'm a professor in an EIR in a venture center, professor at a school, EIR in a venture center. One of the things that I was allowed to do this summer is one thing no business does enough, which is really talk to their customer. And that was terrific because you learn so much. And so the last 6 months, until Omicron came along, we're entirely different from the first 18. But we're in a better place now, even with this new variant, and all pistons are firing, and we're doing well.
Man, this is fantastic. So I want to pause there. And we're going to take a super deep dive into Inc. I want to backtrack a little bit. So again, you scratched the surface on, you've worked at Ralph Lauren. I mean, like major brands, Ralph Lauren, Time, Esquire, GQ. You've mentioned who's who of media. So let's go back to like 2002-ish, we're past the internet bubble, but, times are very challenging. We're post 9/11, Enron, all those things. You landed into digital super early. You mentioned some of those early brands in the 90s. You were a digital marketer before, like, even digital marketing was like a thing. And you were a future trendsetter, looking for future trends and what have you. Talk a little bit about, what you saw, what were successful strategies that you saw then that are still even applicable today in the early digital marketing strategies.
I think what happened for me was that right, you're right. I worked at Time Inc. and Time Warner, which at that time was the world's largest media company, had enormous influence, owned forests for the paper that it printed on, had a fleet of 6 or 7 corporate jets, could get any head of state on the phone when it wanted to, right? It was remarkable. But the fact is that instead of just buying into that and being impressed with the trappings of working at a place, I was honest about my own media consumption habits. And I realized that I was spending more and more time online than I was in print, that I would pick up my laptop and sit down in front of the TV and either look up stuff that I was watching on the TV, look at additional information, or be somewhere else entirely. And so that, and as I mentioned earlier, sort of being, other directed, made me wonder what else could we be doing all of the time. And I had the good fortune of running a TV brand at This Old House at Time Inc. So I wasn't as locked into the history of the company as some other folks were. And so to me, it was just being honest. I remember this one day getting on, I can remember getting my Kindle when it was still that beige plastic, angular looking thing, and sitting on the bus on the way to work and reading the New York Times on it and seeing a book listed and tapping a button and having the book come to the Kindle, right? It's odd because this is not that long ago, right? Like 8 ages ago. And I was like, wow, commerce and content together are really interesting. And I think I just ask those questions, and I'd go to my bosses who are all very smart people, and I'd say, we got to do this, we got to do this. The CEO would go, I don't know anything about TV. We're a magazine company. Right. Think he missed, right? And I think this is the thing for all companies to think about, is what you do is different from who you are and what your purpose is. And so I would have said that as a company, Time Inc.'s purpose was being this incredibly trusted source of information delivery for America. And at that time, I do mean America, because everyone connected with one brand or another, from Time Inc. It wasn't about ink on paper. It was about the information and the trust. And we could convey that information in trust in any way technology or the consumer decided our world was going to change. And that was a hard thing to sell, and the arrogance that existed from prior success, right? When Time Inc. basically bought Warner Brothers, it had the same valuation adjusted for inflation that Uber has today. It was hugely successful company. It sold for, market cap of $80 billion, sold because it got too arrogant for $2 billion. 20 years later. And so I think it's about that, being honest where the consumer is going, being honest where technology is going, seeing how those two things marry. I had Aaron Bally is the founder of Udemy and now of a company called Carbon Health. Only person to have left his village in Turkey to come here. He's a Kurdish Turk. And he knew that he wanted, because he thought it made the most difference for people in his village. The two most important things were healthcare and education. And that's why he founded Udemy. And that's now why he's founded Carbon Health. But he knew, and he told me this, and why I'm sharing this, is that he had to start one or the other first based on whether the technology, so the idea was tertiary. The idea that we all think is the most important thing isn't. Is the technology available to deliver the idea in the right way? And is the consumer willing to adopt the technology? And all those two things also exist. Is the idea the perfect idea? Otherwise, it's just something you tried and failed at. And by reorienting in that way, right? So I guess my point is constantly asking those questions, constantly looking at where the consumer is going and what technology is giving us, sort of can keep us ahead of the curve in a way, my former bosses didn't see.
This is something, because two things. First thing, the underlying time example you gave is so relevant in many places, because people get stuck on that. We print a magazine, that's what we do. It's not, we deliver information and provide trust. And the other thing that we see so much in manufacturing and across the board in business, and you see this too in the United States, is this arrogance from prior success. They see, we always sold like this. We're $100 billion company and we always sold like this. And the next thing you know, there's this company that comes out of nowhere that says, we figured out what the real thing was, like you talked about. And we've capitalized on that, and we're eating your lunch.
And the examples, for us at this point, the examples are so, Time is one example. Kodak, Inventor. Sensor is another, right? Blockbuster, given the opportunity to buy Netflix, another yet. And all of them were too connected to their current revenue streams and had too much of a belief that the way things were are the way things are going to be. And the fact is, someone once said to me, we live at the time of the most rapid change we've ever seen, and it'll never be slower. It's terrifying, but also, if you're willing to, can be so exciting.
That's in here. I had a half an hour call yesterday with a Kodak veteran from the 80s, and he was there, the last bit of the heyday, and just shared, they were just printing money. It was just absolutely insane. So I just, this is, guys, how good is this conversation, Scott? Let's keep it firing, man. So, all right, let's hit Inc. magazine. So Inc. magazine, again, did I share that I'm a raving fan? So, man, this is such an honor. So Inc. magazine was founded by a visionary, 1979. Your company is turning 43 years old this year. So Bernie Goldhirsch, do I have that right? Bernie Goldhirsch founded it. And this is a fascinating entrepreneurial success story, if I understand his story correctly. And I remember, again, when the 80s, when it was still, Inc. was newer and entrepreneurship was kind of like a foreign word, a dirty word, what have you. And so he was a sailing junkie. I think he graduated from MIT. He was a sailing junkie going all over the Caribbean. He came up with a newsletter. It turned into like Sail or Sailing Magazine. built it into this monster success. He was doing like $10-12 million in the 60s and 70s, maybe the 70s, right? If I think I'm close, Scott.
70s, yep.
It turned like he was the accidental entrepreneur. It turned into this thriving business. So he started looking, I need some magazines to help me on how to do entrepreneurship. He couldn't find one. So what does he do? He starts Inc. magazine. It is just such a, guys, Google it. But Scott, talk about the legacy from Inc. What attracted you to Inc. Or just like give us an inside scoop of what goes on underneath the hood of Inc. magazine.
Yeah, it's kind of a remarkable brand. And by the way, the man who owns Inc. magazine right now, his name is Joe Mansueto. He founded Morning Star. He thought that Inc. was so important to his success and in launching Morningstar and becoming quite wealthy from it, that he bought it to make sure that entrepreneurs still had access to the kind of support that Inc. gives to people, because he thought it was that important for other people to have, which is a remarkable story. And also an incredible honor to work at a place like that, right? And so, Inc. for its entire history has had one mission, and that's to support the American entrepreneur. And when you have that mission or that purpose, right, as I mentioned before, it's incredibly clarifying in a lot of ways, right? So at one point, that purpose existed in telling stories of entrepreneurs who were successful, and that was Inc. on paper, right? When the digital era came, we broadened it to do the same thing digitally, still largely just success stories. And then we launched our recognition programs, and we have a set of recognition programs that, if you're successful with, have in fact changed people's businesses. You make the Inc. 5000, suddenly you have M&A opportunities you didn't have before. You have sales opportunities. Apple and Google are willing to do business with you in a way they weren't before. You use it as a recruiting tool in a competitive environment, and people see that and think. So the fight, the programs that we run now are an extension of that. And we still see that as supporting the American entrepreneur, because it allows them to be successful in their job. And, one of the things we'll do is to continue that. And whether that's, with the start of the pandemic, we launched a weekly town hall with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a streaming event that addressed all of the issues that small businesses were facing. And we did that for the first 8 months of the pandemic. That was new, but it was core to our mission of supporting the American entrepreneur. And so, I urge all other businesses to think about what their purpose is, because it's not always what it appears to be on the surface, right? So when I got to This Old House, our most successful part of the brand was this television show that was on PBS, also on PBS for 40 some odd years. Yeah. And I had this hunch that it wasn't as successful, and we had fans who watched the television program with their parents, who are now watching it with their children, right? So we had 3 generations of consumers. And I thought, that's not just about hammers and nails. That's not about 5 guys in Boston doing renovations on expensive houses, right? And so we started to do investigating on this hunch. And through research we did, we realized that the connection people had with the brand was that we provided people confidence to create a safe space for their family. That became our mission, right? And in that mission, suddenly all of these other business opportunities beyond hammers and nails were open to us, but that were still grounded in the consumer trust we had built. And this is how this plays out. And there's a connection to Inc. that I'll get to in one second. We started something called the Remodel Contest based on that. Show us this safe space you created for your family. Yeah. Incredibly successful. It was the first example of user-generated content a national magazine had done. So the magazine version of This Old House, cover to the back, we actually renamed This Old House Your Old House, which, by the way, gave our trademark lawyers fits when we did it. Yeah. But for that one issue, we did it. And a woman wrote me about it and said, I love this. I wish I could do the remodeling myself, but I'm a little bit ill now, so really can't get out. but the stories you tell are so significant, and the homes you show and the stories in those homes are so significant. I thought you might appreciate this poem. And she sent me a needle-pointed poem in
Oh my
a
goodness.
frame that she had. And I thought it was very sweet. And it was about how important home is. And in that editor's letter that I write for Inc. now, but then wrote for This Old House, I mentioned that this woman, Catherine, wrote me this note and sent me this poem, and we showed a picture of the poem. A year goes by, and I get another letter from a woman. She says, you don't know me, but you had a conversation with my sister, Catherine, once. She was ill and passed away, but I want you to know that in her last months, when she couldn't get out of the house, one of the most proud things for her was to take out the pages where you showed the poem she had stitched and share that with other people, right? When your brand can have that kind of connection with somebody, that's incredibly powerful, right? Like that, your your surviving sister writes someone she's never met a letter to thank, right? And so for me, I left media when I left This Old House. We sold it to private equity, and I thought I was done. Yeah. So that and that next chunk of years is where my own failed entrepreneurship comes in. But after failing and being called to talk about Inc., I realized that that same kind of connection that existed for Catherine exists for the Inc. audience, and that I can call up Damon John or Mark Cuban literally to do anything for us because they believe we were help them be successful, and they're willing to do anything in return. Our owner bought the brand because it was successful, right? So when you have an audience like that, when you can cultivate the kind of relationship with an audience, no matter what business you're in, I think if you can they become, Seth Godin calls them tribes, right? But ultimately what they are is they're extensions of you, they're extensions of the brand, they're resources for the brand, they're marketers for the brand, and it's a really, really tight community in the end. And it makes you do as the person responsible for the brand, it makes you so much more considerate about what you do every time because you know the impact you're having on somebody. It makes you pay so much more attention to what the audience wants because you know they're here for a real reason, right? And so for me, what brought me to this role were those people, because I knew that they would be amazing to work with. And I mean work with, not just sell them something, I mean work with, and that I would learn an enormous amount from them, and they would help me be successful, to be perfectly honest.
Wow.
I just did a lot of talking.
Well, it's just no. It's great because you're talking about the real thing behind Inc. or great companies. It's not selling a product. It's building that community that really trusts you, and then taking that trust seriously and really helping that community as much as you can. You talk This Old House, and you talk about Inc. and it's just building that community of people and then going, how can we continue to help those people be successful more and more each day? It's so cool, man.
Or, improve their life. I mean, it can be a lifestyle product, right? But improve their lives that they want to have around them, whatever it is, right? Because if you're just the guy who, or just the woman who's making really fancy nuts and bolts and they're the best in the world, but one day everyone switches for glue, you've got no business anymore, right? So you have to have something else, especially now more than ever. I think this is true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and what a man! My God,
no, my mind is swimming
so
here.
Good, man. And the thing, so again, did I mention I'm a Raven fan? So as look at what you provide, and going back to Bernie's vision, 1979 when he first founded this. There's Fortune magazine, there was Forbes, like corporate, blah, blah, blah. It didn't resonate and connect with the entrepreneur. And again, entrepreneur was like people didn't even know what entrepreneurship meant back then. It was like, you own a small business. Now, thanks, I credit Inc. magazine, where like entrepreneurship is a badge of honor. And what your magazine does is like, it gives people hope. It resonates. It's like, it's relatable. People, are we going to be the next Mark Cuban? Not necessarily, but you have amazing, incredible stories of solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, people that have built things up. And like you said, you're hitting on the head. It gives folks hope. Let's dig into, again, you've talked to thousands of entrepreneurs. And again, you're at the front row. So even let's pretend COVID is, let's throw COVID away for a couple minutes.
I would like to do that. Thank you.
Let's go to our good place and let's just pretend COVID doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What common traits are you seeing, Scott, with entrepreneurs on the Inc. 5000? Are there any particular, and I know like, hey, persistent, consistent, like, if we really got real deep, like what are some common traits that you see when folks are separating themselves from the pack, from the Inc. 5000?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, obviously, people are incredibly hardworking, all of them, and they believe in themselves, and they have a vision, and they're I would say they are wedded to that vision, but like I said before, they're also wedded to hearing what the consumer has to say and adapting their product to what the consumer needs. Perfectly honest, there's a little bit of luck involved, right? So the number one Inc. 5000 company this year was a staffing company, and that's pretty unusual. You think about margins and staffing and all of that stuff and how high touch it is and unscalable in a way. But we went from a place where no one was working and there was mass unemployment to people not being able to hire, right? So they do what they do brilliantly well. I'm not going to say they don't, but there was a little bit of luck for them too, and that the economy was what the economy was. Not everyone has that luck, but I think we should acknowledge that luck plays a role in success, no matter how good you are. I think these are people who do not give up, but they know when to quit, right? And by that I mean they're realistic. They're realists, and they know that they can't give up. That they got to keep the pedal down. But once the car has finally come apart, it's time to go do something else. And like what they learn in doing that something else, and apply it to their. They learn in what they just did and apply it to the something else, I should say. I also think they're a bit critical, but they're also remarkably optimistic. They believe in success, and they believe that they can be successful. And then, there's a lot of technical things that they all do well. I also think on the flip side of it is lots of founders are under incredible stress. They're incredibly lonely, right? They don't necessarily have people to bounce their problems off of, right? Like, I don't want to go to my investors and tell them I'm kind of feeling down right now. I can't go to my team and tell them I'm feeling down right now. And my wife or husband has heard it way too many times. So who do I talk to? And in fact, at Inc., we've started to develop a community called the Masters that comes out of the Inc. 5000. That is a community for founders, by founders to discuss those things themselves, because I think that's significant. And by the way, from a content perspective, I think one of the things that we're focusing on actually is some of that sort of softer stuff that is really significant and actually really hard to deal with, and it is about founder mental health and exhaustion and things like that, because that's a problem. And it's nice to know, I think, that you're not the only person feeling that way. That 2 years ago, our number one Inc. 5000 company, I did an interview with the founder, and he said, I postponed my wedding twice. I missed my best friend's wedding and my other best friend's birth of their child, and I actually ended up in the hospital with exhaustion, right? And that was his journey. Like, I think it's important to tell that story as it is to tell the story about two college roommates who in the dorm room, invented the next unicorn, right?
Yeah.
I think that doesn't
Yeah.
tell the whole story. That tells one story.
And you're right. And people see that success and they don't understand what it took to get there. And they don't understand the daily grind of this. I just had a conversation with someone yesterday about this. And when entrepreneurs, as you said, incredibly lonely, incredibly stressed. And I think we finally come to realize that that's not something we should just live with, because it kills people, it kills relationships.
Absolutely.
And we have to start talking about it. I mean, this is one of the things that personally I can remember in my career, when it was like, hey, you don't show anything. You just don't. That's what you do. And how detrimental that is to people is so understated. And I'm glad to see that you're, like you said, the master's program or whatever the Ink's got going, because you need that help. You got no one otherwise.
I mean, think about it. You've found a business, you've got a family, you're founding a business, you've got a team at work. The pandemic happens. You don't know if you're going to have revenue next week. You still have your bills, and so and you're not just worried about feeding your own family, but most of the founders I talk to, they're just as concerned about taking care of the people who work for them. And that stress at a time we have now is enormous, right? And it does have real impact. It might all happen up here, but it has physical impact.
It does.
And real world consequences. And so I think we have to have an honest conversation about that. And I think in doing that, we'll actually help people, allow people to realize that they can have those feelings and still succeed, that it doesn't mean they're imposters. It doesn't mean they're weak. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. It means they're human beings. And maybe we can help provide a way to, get through that.
Right, man. I absolutely love this. And guys, if I'm sorry, Damon, if you're not subscribing to Inc. magazine, man, put the app on your phone. And Scott, we talked about this, and again, did I share I'm a longtime raving fan? So you guys tackle tough issues and exactly what we're, diversity. You're tackling, mental health. You're tackling, hey, I failed. This didn't work out as well as I had hoped.
Yeah.
I put the mortgage. I bet the farm. I did everything, and it didn't. So like your stories aren't always the, we have to feel jealous or like, man, everybody's a success. Why am I not getting there? So it's a lot of human stories. Damon, what were you going to say?
No, I'll stop on that, because I am just such a proponent of people that, if you're listening out here, and I mean, because it gets into some pretty dark places for entrepreneurs once in a while, and you need to sometimes reach out and find some other help, because it's not anything to take lightly, because your family wants you around, your parents, your kids, whatever. You need to do that, and we'll honestly work ourselves into the grave sometimes, and we got to do that. But the thing I think about Inc. over the years that I've seen, and I've had a few years to look at it, is that the depth of content across the board. I think about that, and it's mind-boggling to me how many people have to work in concert together to deliver this content across the wide spectrum of things that you deliver it for consistently and at such a high quality. So, I mean, what are the things that you're seeing in the future that really makes you excited about this? I mean, as far as the delivery of content, type of content, whatever.
I think the future's something that I'm not going to predict, because I was a guy who said, like, Facebook is dead 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So cable, who's going to do that? I hate to be the predictor, but I think the mental health conversation is going to be significant for a long time, not just for founders, but for entire teams. I think the flexibility conversation also has to be one that needs to be had, because people are just in a place where they don't sacrifice for work the way they used to. Not founders necessarily, but everyone else. Yeah. I think those are some pretty significant things. I think there are fundamentals that remain fundamentals for businesses to be successful. And this, authenticity and that real connection we talked about having that purpose that can help them skip from one rolling log to another as consumer behavior changes. and technology changes. I think that's important, and a clarity to ask yourself the right questions. I think those things are not going to go away. They've always been important. When you look at why businesses fail, they're the things people fail at. Right? I did a study when, as a college professor, of successful e-commerce businesses and ones that weren't successful. And the ones that were successful were doing things that department stores did before they were corporatized 100 years ago, right? There's like, take payments any way you can, right? So it's like, cash, sure, great, but we can put you on credit. Let me write that down here too. So making payments easy. You knew who was selling you something, and it wasn't a corporation. There was a founder story, right? Where John Wanamaker might have become, or Sears might have become big businesses, but they were people back then, right? Yeah. That kind of communication, differentiated product, making a difference in the consumer's life, non-transactional communication. All of those fundamentals, I think, are more important than ever. And Curt, to get back to one of the first stories we told, one of the reasons that I transitioned to work for Ralph Lauren was because there was storytelling there, and not just in the way he showed product, but other ways. And this was 20 years ago now. We were doing content on a retail website, and I think that content made a difference for people. One of my favorite non-transactional content stories, really quickly, because I know we're running out of time, was an email I got from Warby Parker. Didn't try to sell me anything, and it was a music video of the song "Total Eclipse of the Heart," redone for the eclipse that we were having, right? And I don't know how many years ago that was now, but I still talk about it because it was so much fun. Yeah. And it made me a person who would think of Warby Parker when I needed something, not because they were trying to sell me something, not because they were trying to sell me a discount, but because they thought I would enjoy something like they would. And so there was an affinity there. So I think business is so much more personal than sometimes we think about. And if even we can use technology to get to that personal, and increasingly we'll be able to, I think that is where I see business going, which is sort of where business was.
Man, I tell you, this is phenomenal. And again, I love where you guys are touching about that vulnerability aspect, Scott. Inc. magazine, you have, we do a lot of work with the small business development centers. They're all over the country, guys. If you're an entrepreneur, you're struggling, challenge, reach out to your SBDC. We do a lot of work with MEPs, the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. Inc. magazine, Scott, 2011, I went to a conference of Inc. magazine in New Orleans. Damon John was one of the keynote speakers. Guy Kawasaki fell sick, and so they brought in the mayor of New Orleans on last minute, like literally like that morning, and he came in, and everybody was kind of like, hey, Guy Kawasaki is going to be our speaker, and all of a sudden like, oh, but he's not here today. And the mayor from New Orleans at the time, and like you kind of felt like the air go out of the room. I'm telling you, this guy absolutely crushed it. To this day, like I still remember getting chills and meeting all sorts of entrepreneurs. I met a couple entrepreneurs from my area, and it was like, there was 1,000 of us all there together, just really trying to like, hey, how do we move the needle? How can we help each other? And Inc. has done that consistently for 43 years. I know, I wish I could talk to you all day. I know we're coming into time. Sure. Last question for you. I know I probably have like three, I'll probably say that three more times, but last question. You shared, you came into Inc. right. You brought the pandemic with you. That was so nice of you, right into Inc. You shared the first 6 months were a little bit challenging. You turned it around. Now you feel like I'm sensing like you're in the groove. Share a little bit at, your leadership skills, traits. I know you're very humble, but you're steering a really big ship, and it's not just your team that's counting on you. It's all these goofy, raving, crazy entrepreneurs that are counting on you. How do you attribute your leadership skills, and like, how are you guiding the ship at Inc.?
I mean, for me, being a good leader is allowing people the opportunity to take chances, right? And I say that because I've tried to take a lot of chances, and not all of them have worked out. And sometimes some of them, if someone believed in me a little bit more, would have financially really significantly benefited the companies for. So I I just take an approach where, even if I have a very specific idea of what I want to hear what someone else has, because it could be better. I think that's really an important thing, is that, to recognize that good ideas come from any level of the organization. People have lives and interests outside of the role they fill, and to be able to tap into those can be really powerful. Suddenly renews them with passion in a way that they might not have had before. So even though you're hiring for a role, don't limit that person to that role. I admit too, I'm not so great at giving enough praise, frankly, because I maybe I didn't get enough when I was young, and so I don't think it's necessary. But that's something I try to remind myself of all the time, that I have to do. So there are the things that come naturally, and I think that is giving people a place to go to without telling them necessarily how to get there, and helping them along the way, but hoping they find a better way than I would have found. Never saying no, always saying what if, and then providing that support and letting them know that a total train wreck doesn't mean their career is train wrecked because we tried something.
Right. Man, gosh, this is good.
Yeah, that is.
And the thing I love about Ink, I've been reading it for years. I remember, like, you guys came out with this. Hey, there's this new little software company. It's called Twitter. And I'm like, who on earth is going to type 140 characters? That's never going to take off. Then I remember you had this company called Jamba Juice. And I'm like, who's going to buy a bunch of fruit drinks? This is crazy. That's not going to work. So it's fascinating to see, like, what, like you mentioned, Facebook's dead, or, what are things that we think are going to fail, right?
So Inc. also said, right? So this is the thing, right? We remember the successes and not the failures. Yeah. Inc. also said that on its cover, prior to my arrival, that the woman named Elizabeth Holmes was going to be the next Steve Jobs. Right? So you're not always right.
Well, it's not. Go ahead, David.
We make decisions with the information we have at the time. I'll just say that. They're the best decisions at that time with the information we have.
So say if you just dug a little bit more, you would have found the other information.
Yeah, that could be.
Right. So guys, what we'll do, we'll wrap up. So this is the last. So Scott, we work with our heart is with manufacturers in the U.S. here. We're trying to help them make that digital transformation, e-commerce, so on and so forth. Any parting words, any advice for our manufacturers out there from your perspective? How do we supply chain issues, labor shortage? What do you have for these guys?
I think no one isn't impacted by supply chain, right? And I think that provides a really terrific opportunity for American manufacturers. I think lots and lots of companies I talk to are looking for alternatives, looking for, onshore alternatives. I think those manufacturers have to, and some are, more used to this than others, but because of the labor shortage, because of margins, because of all the other macroeconomic things, we have to increasingly look at how we can do things differently. I saw an early comment here about never saying we've always done it that way. Yeah. And that's true. I think everyone, who's here has to think about how can we be more successful with technology, and what piece of technology, what stays human, what gets automated. Is it just the front office, the back office that needs automation and we still keep people on the manufacturing floor? Do we need to build robots? We don't have to do that all at once, one step at a time. But I think the most important thing is to understand it, understand the new things you hear about, understand blockchain and AI and crypto and how your organization can become digital, and then make the decision as to whether it's in your best interests. But just to shut it off is a way to shut your door, and you don't want to do that.
Absolutely. Wow. Man, this was
mic drop right there.
Guys, again, we have Scotty O, Inc. Magazine. Every month he comes out with a great editorial right in the front cover of Inc. Magazine. Guys, if you're, I don't know how, anybody out there. Now, here's the challenge. Here's what we're going to leave you with for today. Everybody listening to, let's make Scott's life as easy as possible. Go out there and absolutely crush it for 2022. And let's get on the Inc. 5000. Just make Scott's life easier. Then he doesn't have to go out and find everybody because they're hanging out right here with us today. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Scott, dude, our hats off to you. Thank you for what you do. Our entrepreneurs are the heroes of our economy. And dude, you're right in the front line supporting every single one of you. So what you do is so admirable. Thank you.
Damon, Curt, thanks so much. It was a pleasure, really. I absolutely enjoyed being able to talk with you guys.
This was awesome. So guys,
Thanks.
so we'll wind down. Thank you, Scott. Man, you made my year. So guys, go out, be inspired, do great things as entrepreneurs. And just, again, we want to see people on the cover of Inc. magazine. So Damon, take it away. God bless everybody. Have an awesome weekend. Thank you, Scott. Hang out with us for 1 minute.
All right. Scott, Curt, awesome. I would just want to say John, Gail, Matthew, Dan, Brandon, Pete, Christina, Charlene, Bonnie, other people I missed. You know, thanks for listening. Thanks for the people that didn't comment that are listening. But man, Scott, thanks so much for being here today. Curt Anderson, everybody appreciates it. We'll be back again next week, everyone. Thanks so much for now. See you later.
Thank you, guys.